we're going.
Oh, okay.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Read Science. We're talking about tweeting this out. So if you're not here, you can be here soon. Anyway, this is Joanne, joined by my co-host Jeff. And here on Read Science, this is a Google Hangout on Air, which I guess next time we do this will be YouTube Live, which will be, I think, the same thing, just a new name. And anyway, so today, those of you who are joining us may have been expecting also Natalia Hold, and she has come down with laryngitis. She's a bit under the weather, and this happens. So we are going solo today with Amy Shira Teitel, who many of you know. Hi, yeah, that's right, say hi. And we are specifically going to start by talking about her book that came out, I want to say January, Breaking the Chains of Gravity, the story of spaceflight before NASA, which we know that vintage space things are Amy's specialty. And so I'm going to go ahead and do a bit of a bio. Actually, I don't have one written down, but I sort of know Amy from many, many years ago. We met each other at Science Online, and yeah, all of us science communicators tend to sort of find each other at some point. So Amy began by writing articles about vintage space. You know what? We will ask you which are your favorites, but and then she wrote for Popular Science magazine. She's done videos, lots and lots and lots of videos, great videos. She's worked for Discovery Channel and for the D News, and has learned a lot from that. So her videos get better and better every year. I see the improvement. It's fantastic. And so it's great to have Amy on today. We will ask her more about herself and her book and why she wrote the book and everything and all her future plans. I guess she's got big plans, right? Yes. So go ahead and say hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you for having me, and hello everybody who's watching.
Great, thanks for coming. Okay, Jeff gets to throw out the first question.
Okay, well, it's a spoiler, but we know how this book ends. NASA is created. And there's a lot of stuff that come before there, which shouldn't be too surprising, but people might not know about that. So NASA was created in 1958 by Congress at the urging of President Eisenhower through the National Aeronautics and Space Act. And I wanted to start with some deep background. Tell us the story, if you can, about the contribution of the International Geophysical Year of 57, 58. And I was really interested in sort of the sources, the family tree for the IGY and how it came about, and then how it was sort of the impetus for us actually getting there, in addition to Sputnik, which we know more about, but International Geophysical Year and what it did for the U.S. space program.
Yeah, not many people know too much about the IGY. I feel like it's one of those things that the nerds know about it because that was what allowed satellites to start flying. But most people don't really think about the fact that international scientific cooperation had to start at some point and had to have some kind of organization. One of which was the International Geophysical Year. It was, I think it was, off the top of my head. This is the problem with writing a book that came out a year ago, is that
Yes.
I haven't looked at it in a really long time, so I'm like just trying to recall the details and forget all the other things
your way around things. And I had never known before that the Geophysical Year grew out of the International Polar Year, which was a cooperative thing, right?
Yeah, there were two International Polar Years, I want to say, and you probably know the dates better than I do off the top of my head, but I want to say the first one was in the 1890s, and the second one was in the 1920s or 30s. Because using that data was kind of halted by the Second World War, which kind of stopped international collaboration. So the idea was to take advantage of interesting things happening in the world and have scientists all over the world collaborate on taking observations and then merge their data to gain a more complete picture. And this has happened with two polar years, and scientists after the Second World War wanting to finish using the data gathered from the Second International Polar Year brought up the idea of doing a third international collaboration, but there was some interest in making it rather than a polar year, doing a geophysical year, because there was going to be peak solar activity from about July of 1957 to December of 1958. So that was the year, even though it's 18 months. The idea being that all of this cool stuff is happening in the sun. It's going to be interacting with Earth's atmosphere. We're starting to understand space. Let's put people data and then merge it and learn for the good of humans. And part of that, because this is happening in the 50s and there are missiles launching and people are starting to look at satellites independently all over the world, starting to think about it, both the United States and the Union agreed, participate, launch small satellites to gather data, right? You can gather better data about space outside the atmosphere. So this kind of laid the groundwork for both nations to actually launch a satellite. So you knew it was coming, even though these two nations are politically opposed and in the beginning stages of a Cold War. Well, not really beginning at that point, but in a Cold War. They're both looking at kind of doing this thing that is very scientific, but ultimately also a very strong show of technological dominance. So yeah, that kind of laid the groundwork for what was going to be one versus the other in launching the first satellite. And ultimately, I would say that it came down to Eisenhower's choice to promote the Navy, the U.S. Navy's Vanguard program over the U.S. Army's Redstone/Jupiter program. The Army's program was built on Nazi technology, and the Navy's was not. It was peaceful rockets, and he didn't want war in space.
It seemed like the zeitgeist had been building so that it was, people going up in various ways, high flying altitudes, rockets were going on, all sorts of things, and people had different agendas. It seemed like the geophysical year sort of nucleated the event and said, launching the satellite, and look what the Soviets just did, but launching the satellite to do that's something that we should do, and now's a good excuse to do it.
Yeah, it did kind of pull together all of the that's kind of the whole reason that I wrote this book, is that there's all these pieces that were starting to go into space, and they were all happening simultaneously, and they just need to be brought together. And the IGUI really was the impetus, because that was the first thing to say, satellites and launching things into space is not for the crazies and for the weirdos and the fringe scientists who want to go float around like sci-fi movies. This is for the people who want to actually learn about what's going on our planet and on other planets for the sake of knowledge and science. And once you get that going, it just snowballs.
For the average person not paying too much attention, how big a surprise was it to find out that space was totally doable and was something that was about to happen?
For the average person?
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah, I don't.
Were they surprised?
I think it was.
Sputnik did a lot of weird things to the American psyche. Was that? No. Well, I was there, but I was only about this big.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've talked to family members about this a little bit. Those who were around, obviously. I think the idea was that you kind of knew that it was there, but it wasn't, that without a national space agency, or, I'm from Canada, my Canadian family, you don't have any kind of military that's tending towards space at all. It was kind of there, and it was kind of neat, but it was kind of other. Like it not to say otherworldly, but it was, people might have known about it, but they probably thought that it was just for those weird kids that liked science class in school, that it wasn't really part of the national mindset at all. So it was probably not something that people would have given really any thought. I mean, I can't imagine, if you don't know about something, how can you be giving it any thought if you don't know that it's feasible? And then all of a sudden it's feasible, and then it's just like, well.
People would have known of the V2 from the war, because that made quite a splash. But making the connection between that and rockets that could actually launch into space, that's quite a haul. And it's sort of a question, but it's really something I hadn't really thought about before either.
Right, interesting. And I'm thinking about it, and like the things I've read, not just your book, but other places, just that early rocketry where they're just trying to go straight across land, that would draw a crowd. you know.
Yeah, and there were, I do get into a little bit, some of the early demonstration tests of the power of rocketry were done with cars in Germany by this very little known figure named, oh my god, what is his name? Max Fallier, that's his name. Fritz von Opel was the name that was coming up with it. He gave the cars to Fallier's rocket test.
Yeah, he was fun.
People sort of knew that this stuff was happening, but because none of it's not like Fallier had rockets that really worked every time and was demonstrating really great feats of things going up into space. You know, his first rocket car test failed spectacularly. It was just kind of like it didn't do anything because friction is a hard thing for a small rocket to overcome. So, you know, when that's kind of what people see with rockets, and then maybe you see them developing as weapons, and even the V2, I mean, even though it did kind of begat the Redstone rocket that launched the first Americans into suborbital space, like, if you see the rocket cars that don't really work, the things that go fast but ultimately aren't practical, and then you see the weapons, that's kind of a leap, I think, for the average person to make of, okay, we can actually modify this technology, make it more powerful, add things to it, and then go into space with it. I mean, that takes a leap of imagination. It's, I think one of the things that I kind of didn't really think too much about before I started working on this book is that a lot of people had the tools but didn't necessarily make that connection, and it was, you know, the military leadership had to be convinced of some of these uses of rocketry, and it was, you know, the people who wanted to use those technologies to go into space were very much the fringe scientists, and were kind of the ones that were like, okay, it may be feasible, but you have to be quiet about it, because you're going to look like a weirdo.
Well, it was not very long since most, I mean, it had only been, say, 10, 20 years since most scientists of repute were poo-pooing the idea of rockets in space because there was nothing to push against.
Oh my God, and I still get that question all the time.
And yeah, these days,
like last week.
These days in an intro physics course we can teach, come on, it's conservation of momentum, but that was not obvious in 1928.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is
that's I think it's hard, and I mean, maybe you can speak to this because you are a physics teacher, but people think of things as being like, oh, this is my experience. If I jump, I have to jump off of something. Therefore, I am pushing against something. Therefore, a rocket is pushing against the ground. It's sort of like, okay, it's hard to, you know, the scientists who kind of understood the way rockets work in the 20s and started thinking about how that technology could eventually be applied to spaceflight, they might not have. That made sense to them, but it's really hard to translate that when you don't have rockets that work at all to the average person who has no understanding and no reason to think about things that are outside their own physical experiences.
But if things are ballistic, or if you're in Earth orbit, conservation of momentum is pretty simple, and I'm a little sorry to say that most science fiction programs don't get it right, and so people who watch those are getting very poor lessons in how rockets actually work.
Well, it's because the real stuff never looks as exciting as Hollywood can make it.
Nothing. It's dull, and you wouldn't be able to hear it or anything. So before we leave the creation of NASA and Eisenhower, comment a little bit on Eisenhower's concerns and how it came about that a particular branch of the military was leading on things, that the military was involved at all, how he wanted to try to keep the military out of things. A lot of paths have developed from these very tiny decisions that Eisenhower made because of the way he felt about things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the you know, post-World War II, we had, well, we being America, sorry, international viewers, there were 3 military branches, and they all had their own separate rocket programs. Von Braun and a large part of the German contingent that came over from Germany and was integrated to U.S. society ended up with the Army developing rockets based on the V2 technology. And the Air Force was developing its own, also based on the V2 technology, although taking it with a different strain. And then the U.S. Navy was developing something completely different. Still similar technology. I mean, a rocket's a rocket, but you know, while the Army and Air Force were building V2 heritage rockets, for military purposes. The Navy was building smaller sounding rockets for research purposes, right? These are just rockets that kind of go up and do some data and come back down. So when it came time to pick one of the military branches that was going to launch the first satellite under the fully civilian scientific realm of the IGY, so this is nothing military, Eisenhower picked the U.S. Navy because there was absolutely no military connection of that rocket being used as a weapon. It was purely scientific. It was purely, you know, it wasn't civilian. It was Navy owned, but there was no ties to Nazis. There was no use of it as a missile, and this was his way of making sure that space did not become a battleground, because that was really like something he did not want to get into. Of like, okay, this Cold War is starting to gain some kind of traction. Let's not start having war in space because I don't know how to war in space. Like, ugh. So the idea was to keep Reagan completely, save that for the 80s. You know, the idea was to keep it all civilian, keep it all on the peaceful side for science, for exploration, for all the good things. And that's why he picked Vanguard over
questions that people had not thought about. It's like, can you fly over a sovereign country with your satellite? Who owns the space?
Yeah, because
was a big concern.
Eisenhower was big on the, and again, you have read this more recently than I have,
yes.
the open skies policy, in which he wanted to be able to fly over Soviet airspace. And this was something he was trying to get forward, and there was questions of, you know, okay, well, if we have satellites, if they're launched for science on non-killing, well, Union, we can see what they're doing with the sake of openness, and it'll all be for peace, with a little military sidebar there. But it was, you know, the idea was to make it not something that would turn the Cold War hot, basically, and that's kind of how that ended up being the chosen rocket for the first American attempts.
During all that angst immediately after the launch of Sputnik, I was very amused by the person you reported telling Eisenhower, well, at least the Russians seems to have settled the question whether we can fly over another country.
I mean,
so these things get taken care of, and then they are questions that nobody knows about until you read the book. Thanks for bringing those things to light.
And it's true. This book, I mean, this is, for people who might go, I don't care about this, before NASA, it was really very fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I just felt like I had no idea of some of these things. And so I'm like really glad you wrote the book. I'm really glad I read it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to do this story, is because there's sort of this idea of NASA was born in 1958 and then it went to the moon. It's like,
yes.
Well, nothing happens like that. And it's just so interesting that like there's this whole root of rocketry, and sort of the other thing that I kind of wanted to show with this is that like NASA wasn't created in a vacuum and get to the moon in a little over a decade. It was building off of 40 years of knowledge. So when you say, well, why aren't we doing more in space? Well, things take time, and you can't just say like, if we went to the moon in 9 years, why aren't we doing this now? It's like, because it wasn't 9 years. It was actually like 50 years. And it's still really hard. So it's just sort of like give you an appreciation that like NASA had to come from somewhere, and that somewhere was a very big amount of research and big programs coming together at the right time.
And in the midst of, you know, geopolitical strife of the World War. And, you know, and of course, lots have been written about von Braun, but it was good to put his struggle on trying to defect and everything, and then what were his limitations once he came to the United States. So he's brilliant, but sorry, we're not just going to let you work on anything.
Yeah, he's admittedly like the toughest one to deal with, because, you know.
Yeah, what should we do with Wernher von Braun?
I know. It's he's an awkward one, especially for someone with Jewish family. How do you kind of fix the fact that, like, yes, Nazi, yes, all of that bad, but also the Saturn V that took Apollo to the moon. So it's sort of like, well, you got to figure out some way to kind of just be neutral.
Since we're talking about Wernher, one question I particularly wanted to ask, and this is going to be for your opinion, obviously. this, and maybe you can recount for us a little bit of the somewhat harrowing story of his escape from Germany into American hands and not Russian hands. But my question was, why is that not a major motion picture yet?
I don't know. I don't know.
It's such a story.
It is an amazing story, but it's probably that very conflict you're talking about.
Mm.
You know, but that makes
that conflict. You can't write. You can't make a good movie, I guess, about like rooting for Nazis. Because ultimately, that's what you're doing. It's like
an SS officer who got American men to the moon.
Yeah, it's sort of like he's that really tough character, and I honestly, I don't know, and I've wondered that a lot. I've wondered why there aren't movies about him, because he's a really fascinating character of like this. Yeah, I think he might just be too hard, or maybe nobody's pitched it right. I don't know.
Right.
You know, I wondered that.
He gets his mention in October Sky, and you know all these other shows, but nothing about him.
Because whenever I give a couple, you know, the talks that I kind of run through with things, he features in a couple of them, obviously, because he's kind of a big name. And across the board, I mean, even if it's a general audience, not necessarily a pure space nerd audience, I always just kind of, I keep things super casual. And I always ask, like, so this guy familiar? This guy, anyone recognize the face? And, like, you know, more than half are saying, like, yeah, I know that guy. It's like, yeah, everybody knows who he is, but no one really knows what to make of him. It's kind of that weird... He's a weird figure.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of interesting historical figures are like that, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're rarely all nice people.
Right. There's something. So actually, I do want to, because our additional guest is going to be Natalia Hold, and she talked about, her book was The Rise of the Rocket Girls, and I'm just going to pitch that here. We're hoping to talk to her. This is the book about the women who, well, it says here, the women who propelled us from missiles to the moon to Mars, right? And just these women who actually did hand calculations of everything. And the reason why actually, you know, I thought you two would be a good pairing was because there is overlap in the time frame. And Werner von Braun features in this book, and that struggle of who's going to get to build these rockets to go to space?
Yeah.
You know, so these gals were stationed at JPL. Well, they didn't get chosen. Like you said, it ended up being the Navy. You know, it was interesting. So I felt like there was enough overlap. But the other thing I also noticed, like your book, hardly any women, just from the perspective of who's actually building the rockets. So that's why these books with these women, it's like suddenly like, women were involved? Really? Wow.
Yeah,
you know.
There were. It's one of those things that there were a lot more women involved than anybody really realized, and I mean, quite frankly, just in my writing the book, I mean, there's a few women that I talk about. Vera Winzen is kind of the big one, I guess, who managed the team that hand-stitched and made the balloons that launched the Man-High program, and
that's right.
You know, she was deeply important. And somebody brought up, I didn't even think about this, that I talk about the movie Frau im Mond, which was Fritz Lang's 1927 silent film about a mission to the moon, because it is Harper's Gold. It's a very weird movie, and it's on Netflix, and you should all watch it. If you can stand a silent movie from the 20s, it's like 2 hours long. It's really long. But it was written by Lang's wife. It was written by a woman. And I think she's in it, maybe? I can't remember if that's who the actress is, but there's all these things where, like, you don't really realize, like, yeah, there were women involved, and quite frankly, for me, just putting together the narrative, because of the time frame, the key players and sort of the major things just happen to be largely male.
Right.
It's kind of one of those things where, like, you know, it's an issue of the time more than anything. And
Exactly. Oh, and even in reading Rise of the Rocket Girls, I ended up becoming very angry at one point because one girl was playing prominently. She was pregnant. And they said, oh, sorry, you're a liability you have to now go on maternity leave. It's like, what? And that's how it used to be.
But I mean, that carried through for a long time. I've been doing some stuff on the Mercury 13, the 13 women who passed all the same physical tests as the Mercury 7 astronauts in the 60s but couldn't fly because it was the 60s. That one of the arguments against having women in the astronaut corps was that you would lose them to marriage. That as soon as they got married and had kids, you wouldn't be able to have them training. And all these women were like, well, some of us have had kids and some of us don't want kids. And we all want to go into space more than have a kid in the next 5 years. But it was one of those things that, like, even in the 80s, I mean, the classic story of when Sally Ride was going up for a 7-day mission, and they gave her 100 tampons because no one knew. Like, I just love the idea of, like, all of these doctors, these male doctors that should know things about a body with wives and probably daughters on some level, still had absolutely no idea about, like, basic female physiology. It's just like, it's really not that hard, guys. They're just humans. We're just humans.
Right. I saw your video on that, and that was amusing. And in fact, that was one thing where I said, "Oh, this will be great." Amy's been doing a few videos about women in space, and it's I mean, it is so interesting. So let's just sort of focus on your personal trajectory to being where you are. So actually, I looked at your website, and I can't believe I never looked at it before. There's this adorable picture of you. Okay, no wonder. So there's an adorable picture of you standing near the, what's the word? A Venus
like the
presentation.
board? Yeah.
Yes. So obviously, this starts way back, right?
Yeah, that was I love that my mother is such a pack rat, and I'm so happy that she had that picture that, like, I think my elementary school principal took that picture and then gave it to the class president's mom or whatever it was, and, like, my mom ended up with it and, like, dug it out 5 years ago, and I'm like, I'm so glad you have this, because that was the project that, like, turned me into a space nerd. And I can't totally remember how it happened, whether I picked it or was assigned it or what, but I remember my family was vacationing in the U.S. Virgin Islands when I was 7, and my dad had pointed out Venus in the sky, and I knew a little bit about it because of this project, or maybe it was backwards, I can't remember, but it was so fascinating to me that there's this planet that's roughly the size of the Earth, not that much further from the sun than we are, or closer to the sun than we are, but it's super hot, it rotates the wrong way, it has no moon, and it's like the Earth inside out backwards, but it's right there. And I was like, it's right there and it's so different. I want to know what else is right there and so different, and I just became like a giant nerd. And then I had one of those, like, little kid first space book. I think I might have it here, or maybe not. But anyways, there's a little book with, like, a 2-page spread on every planet. I got it when I was like 7 or 8 at the book fair, and there was a 2-page spread on the moon. There's a little cartoon of 2 men standing on the moon in front of a lunar module, and I was just like, men went to the moon? Why was I not informed? And I was just I was just like, how, why, what, why did nobody tell me that this was a thing that happened? Because the moon is pretty and awesome, and I looked at it every night. So yeah, that's when I just became like, I want to know how and why they did this. And the more you ask that question, the more complicated the answer becomes. So I'm still kind of, like, satisfying my 7-year-old curiosity. So yeah, this is like without giving away my age, a many years long fascination.
Right, and so you, but you chose, I love it so much, I want to talk about it and tell the world about it, not I want to be someone building the rockets to go there.
Oh, I wanted to.
You did.
I did want to. So yeah, when I was a kid, I, like every space nerd, I wanted to be an astronaut. I can't really math.
Okay.
So I was not necessarily the most math brain, but part of it too is I'm quite short. I am 4'11", which is NASA's astronaut corps. And I've also I was in a car accident when I was a kid, and I've had stomach surgery twice and back surgery twice, and that would make me medically unfit, I believe, because if you are prone to intestinal adhesions, you die. So yeah,
okay.
That I couldn't face from a young age, but I wanted to pursue it somehow. But actually, my high school guidance counselor told me that I wasn't smart enough to take physics because I was at too low a level of math. And I said, I don't care. I want to try it. I don't care if I'll do it for a year in grade 11, and if I fail, I'll take the, you know, the science that's a little bit easier for me, and I'll get the better grades and get into college, and it'll all be fine.
Yeah,
but they
good
wouldn't
for
let me
you.
do physics. They wouldn't let me do it. So because my school was all about, we need our graduates to have good grades so that we can get the next round of high-paying, nerdy kids in, because it was a snooty private school. So I don't have a high school math credit because my level of math satisfied international baccalaureate requirements, but not Ontario high school requirements. And I have no physics background. I was forced into biology, which for somebody who gets really squeamish around things like blood and doesn't want to cut open a fetal pig, it was the worst. So yeah, I really wanted to like be involved in space somehow, but I was told I wasn't smart enough. So I had this like weird interest in space, but I was told that I should go be an artist. So it's like, I have no idea what to do with my life. So I ended up in undergrad, just luckily ending up at a university, University of King's College in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Awesome school. That has they offer an undergraduate degree in history of science. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. So I started taking those classes, and it was my second to last year because I did a victory lap because I changed majors so many times. My advisor said, well, you like space. It was 2007, write about Sputnik. And I was like, I can write about that stuff and that satisfies requirements for history of science technology? Of course it does. Because we went from like ancient Egyptians transmuting metals science, the Manhattan Project, and that's where we stopped. So we never got into space. So that's when I was like, oh my God, I can actually just engage with the stuff that I love, and it works. So that's kind of when I figured out how to kind of combine my more artistically inclinedness and my love of writing, because that's always been a thing with my love of old space stuff. It was like a really, really weird way to come about it, and even then it was like, well, you know, and then I was told, you're not smart enough to be a professor. So I went into public relations, and that was the worst. You know what? And then I went back to grad school.
But you've been such a benefit to, you know, communication of science to the general public. Even NASA, of course, does a bang-up job of this. They know how to engage with the public. But you're sort of saying, let's not forget what it used to be like. You know?
Yeah, I think it's, well, one of my things, I mean, being a history nerd, is that I absolutely love context, because things are great, right? Okay, I mean, it's just like, speaking of NASA doing a bang-up job, I mean, I've worked with NASA on some communication stuff before, right? The big one being the Pluto in a Minute series that I did with New Horizons. So it was one of those things that, like, okay, getting to Pluto is great. Everyone's excited about that. They'll be more excited if they understand how hard it is to get there, just how long this mission has been in the works. So giving them, just having that like little bit of historical context to me makes it make more sense and make people care more. So that's where I kind of try to translate my own personal love of history and kind of make it into something that people are still interested in and still have a reason to want to know about.
We agree that the context is vital. Yes, Joanne?
Oh, of course.
I mean, the number of times you see people freaking out about space news or something, and they don't really like, okay, well, let's look back at where this came from and understand why you're freaking out. It's like, I'm trying to think, I don't know. I just feel like every time space news, it's like, oh, they found water on Mars. It's like, okay, well, let's dial it back. Let's look at the past discoveries that we've had. Let's look at the little bit of history we have in this strait, and let's put it into context and really understand what this is, because it's still not a lake.
Right.
It's still building on all of that past knowledge. It's building on all that research, and you can't really understand why it's important without understanding why.
Well, plus you get all of the colorful characters. I mean, now you're making me think. I can't remember his name, but the guy who decides to do research into whether humans can withstand the G-forces of launch.
Oh, John Paul
Straps himself into a rocket-powered chair. And shoots off at 700 miles an hour and then stops in a second and a half to see whether he flies into pieces or not.
Well, this is one of the things that I love so much about the 40s, 50s, 60s, is that we didn't have things like fancy supercomputers to do models of what was going to happen, right? So people just had to figure it out. That's why the X-1 was built, was because nobody could figure out how to break what was going to happen to a plane going through the sound barrier.
Right.
So, and wind tunnels don't work because the forces get all messed up when you're bouncing off walls, and you couldn't model an airplane and build it. You just had to build the airplane. It's just like you have these people putting themselves literally on the line to figure out this stuff. It's just like it's such a foreign to the modern perspective. Such a foreign way of doing science, I think, because everything's modeled and everything's done with computers as opposed to just like building something and seeing if it works.
Well, you pointed out that it's a tough problem that I made a note of. It's like if you want to design a supersonic aircraft, you need data. How do you get the data if there are no supersonic aircraft to measure things?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
no
you have
supercomputers to model it, like you say.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stories from sort of figuring out what shape early spacecraft should take of just, let's build a little wooden model. Well, let's just drop different paper cutouts and see which one floats better, and then based on that, let's build a wooden one and just drop that down a flight of stairs and see what happens. Because there was no other way. I mean, it's just a great, like, even like NASA and its predecessor, the NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, it's like almost grassroots science in some ways.
But they had to start somewhere. I'm amazed.
Yeah.
Of course people have died in rocketry, but I'm amazed not more have.
It is pretty impressive, and I think there's a lot of luck involved in a lot of that survival. The one that jumps out to me, I mean, of course, my book starts, spoiler alert, with Max Feli being killed by his own exploding combustion chamber. But there's that story of Von Braun's, the exact same problem.
Yes.
With Chuck Yeager certainly
starting. Yeah, he's been through a decent amount. My favorite part about John Paul Stack's story, going back to him, is that he died in like the ripe old age of like 90 or something. Like he only passed recently. He put himself through so much, and he was totally fine. But yeah, Von Braun lighting a combustion chamber with a bottle of flaming gasoline on the end of a stick, and it exploded, and it was amazing that the 4 guys involved in that test, nobody died. Like, Dornberger was just behind a tree. Like, nobody expected these things to be so explosive, but they were.
So let me ask this question. So coming to today, so of course SpaceX recently had a big explosion. Do you find yourself as fascinated by modern events unfolding as you do with the past?
Less so.
Okay.
Less so, I think, in part because I was in Australia most of the month of August, and that SpaceX explosion happened, I think, the day that I flew back. So, like, I totally missed it. I landed and had all these requests for interviews, and, like, I have no idea what happened. There's so much going on right now that it's really, really hard to keep tabs on every single mission that's launching, that's doing something, that's, I don't know. I mean, why did I see NASA TV on at the gym yesterday? Like, I don't know what happened, but apparently it was on the news. Juno did something, I could tell, because it was pictures of Jupiter. So I kind of check up on these things, but I can't follow everything. It just becomes like an oversaturation. Like, either I can follow the things that are happening now, or I can do my work, which kind of is like the weird payoff. So I'm aware of it, but I'm less. It's just less of a fascination for me, just by virtue of the fact that I love my own sort of little niche thing, and that's working on that takes up so much of my time that I can't also be following every space event.
I don't think
and that makes sense. Oh, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I know OSIRIS-REx is launching tonight. So
yes, I didn't know that, but
I know you must have known it.
I don't know that I am going to stay up and watch it or be necessarily perfectly aware and watch it, but I will probably check Twitter and see that it got off the ground fine and see what's happening with it. But yeah, it's just, there's so much happening right now. I can't keep track of everything.
And so actually you do something unique. Oh, it's not like so unique no one else has ever thought of it, but in general, but you will on occasion sort of live tweet a historical event.
Yeah.
And so which
like
one
the
of those was the most fun for you?
So yeah, just for those out there who don't know, I live tweet Apollo missions on their 45th anniversaries. I've done 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and just finished 15. And it's such a weird thing to do, and people get kind of annoyed with it. Because they're wondering, like, they're looking at all this, their Twitter feed, and all of a sudden it's like, Apollo 15 is 135,000 miles from home, and the crew is still sleeping. They're like, why do I care? But it's fun to me. No, I do it because I think it's interesting to kind of put that into context. Like, if you watch Apollo 13, so my favorite was Apollo 13, and I feel like I should show you that I'm drinking my iced coffee out of an Apollo 13 glass. If you watch the movie Apollo 13, it's like super punchy, super exciting, and it's 2 hours long, and it's done. The real mission was like 6.5 days. So if you actually, by live tweeting it, I gave people a sense of just how much downtime there was on that flight. And all of a sudden you realize, like, oh my God, this was a really long time for these guys to be stranded really far away. And when you see it in your Twitter feed, people were responding to me saying that it was such an interesting way to kind of understand what really happened on that flight, because now you put it in the context of your real life, you have an appreciation of it. And the other thing that I love about doing that one especially is I read all the transcripts, that's where I get the tweets, and to see the way the crew handled that and to see the way the crew and the ground interacted was really incredible. There's a great moment when they were reading up the re-entry procedure, which was a huge issue to figure out how to power up the command module so they can come back safely and not die on that. You get all the way back to Earth safely and then you burn up in re-entry. Nobody wants that to happen. There was a moment where whoever was on Capcom, I can't remember, said, well, we've got the re-entry procedure for you, but we're just going to wait till everybody who has helped write it is in the room because they all want to be here. And you just have that mental image of everybody piling into the Mission Control Center, and just, not everyone can talk, they're all just listening, and they're all just being there, because it was huge moment of figuring out how to save these 3 guys, and you get an appreciation of that when you start to see how long it took.
On missions, you just remind me that on missions, NASA, they do good PR, and we talked about that and things, but they also tend to encourage a good sense of occasion.
Yeah. NASA's pretty good at telling you to celebrate when something awesome happens.
When something happens.
Yeah. I don't have more to add to that.
No, you said, landing a person on the moon is a thing. It was a thing. Why didn't anyone tell you? Is that thing receding? Is that being forgotten? Is it taking its place in history now? I'm an old fart. I was alive. I watched it on TV, but it's not as present for people now, is it? How do you?
It's not. I think it's sort of the butt of jokes now. The one that comes to mind is, everybody always says, well, you can put a man on the moon, but you can't have a cell phone battery that stays charged all day. Well, it's become that thing of like, oh, you're so great, you did this once, but it's so long ago now that people are just like, well, what have you done for me lately? It's receding into like almost mythical history, I think, and it gets more interesting as we start to lose people who've walked on the moon, and that's sort of the only thing that reminds people that, oh yeah, that did happen. People kind of know about it, but nobody really cares. Yeah, it's a strange thing. It's a strange thing to have my work and my career so heavily based on something that most people don't care about until you tell them something they didn't know, and then they get all excited about it again.
Well, you are a historian here.
Yeah, this may be your lot in life if you're a historian.
Yeah, it's true, and it's so interesting doing popular history that no one cares about. Yeah.
So do you think?
Which is amazing to me that people watch my YouTube channel.
Well, you do very well on that regard. And actually, I wanted to bring this up, but it's almost necessary. So Emily Grassley had mentioned, where are the women talking about science, etc. Yeah. And well, you're a perfect example of someone talking about the technology. It is history, but it's more scientific. And there you are. And so congrats for doing that.
Thanks.
And probably having to endure. I bet, so my guess is your feed has some people who probably, just grow up, be more appropriate. But then you have a lot of people who are really probably super engaged with the material, who like have helpful, like, hey, oh, what about this or something? Like you could have some really good conversations about this.
Yeah, I'm lucky. My audience is really great. If anybody out there, a lot. I've been doing this. It's almost 6 years since I started my blog and started kind of doing this stuff publicly. That I've a bit of time to kind of gather an audience that has known me for years and has watched me develop as a writer and as a host and all that stuff. And they're really supportive to the point if somebody says something deeply negative, they will respond. And it's amazing. Yes. I mean, it just like warms my heart to see that. And a lot of them just do have good questions and just want to know things. And they're like, I don't really understand this. Can you explain this to me? And I'm like, actually, yeah, that's a really good video. So it's a mix of sort of, well, let me answer your history question. Let me tell you about something that I found that I think is cool and I wanted to know about, so I'm going to tell you about it, whether you like it or not. And also, let me answer your technical questions, because ultimately, that's important, even if it's less exciting than like the story of eating tuna going to the moon, which is just fun. Right. And just to come back to me not being an engineer or an astronaut, I think that's actually what could not have predicted this when I was told I'm not smart enough to do physics. That having no engineering background, a really good person to tell people about engineering, because I have to translate it into English for me first. If I can get my head around it, I can make anybody understand it, because I'm not an engineer. So I can
We've heard this from several guests who are, English majors and not scientists, who say, hey, if I have to make a scientist explain it so I understand, this, I can make this happen for other people to understand. So it seems to work really well. And then, of course, we have our group of scientists who are writer who are also very good at explaining.
Well, being, aspirational communicator, I think there's going to be something in common, like an interest and an empathy with listeners and a desire to share things. And then that, for me, that leaves room. It's like, indeed, the naive perspective, the not trained perspective is very useful at getting at some things, and the trained perspective is very useful. But they share the desire to say things that people can understand. That's not that hard to do, provided you actually want to, provided you're interested in the people listening to your stories.
Yeah, but it does demand that you have that ability to forget that you know a lifetime of intricate detail about something and bring it down to the basic level, which I think a lot of scientists have problems with. And there are a few who are really good at it. But it is hard, and it's sort of like, I mean, I had my dad's a doctor, and him trying to explain my, again, hated the squeamishness of the biology, him explaining basic biology concepts, he was, it was harder for him to break it down and to forget, like, right, I don't have a lifetime of medical training, so let's take this down 50 notches.
I've had occasion to say to people that I don't remember what it's like not to know calculus.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are some things that I'm not particularly good at, but we understand. One can know one's limitations, I think.
Yeah, and that's where my audience comes in really helpful, because I'll say things and I'll forget that, like, oh yeah, you haven't all read all of the technical documents that I have. You haven't gone into the details of the history that I have. And then that's great, because then it's another question that I can answer. Like I'll mention, I mentioned pogo in a video, which is a thing I have to refresh my memory on this, but when the fuel sloshes in a rocket and then it starts to vibrate up and down, not laterally, vertically, I guess, even though it's pitching over, and that can cause vibrations that can hurt an astronaut. And I mentioned that in a video once, and everyone's like, I don't know what that means. I'm like, oh yeah, I should do a video on that, which reminds me that I should do a video on that.
You still have things to do. So let me ask, I actually have two questions about books. One is your massive collection behind you. I asked you a little before we came on. So tell us, how much are space books and how much are not space books? And
yeah, so the shelves you can see behind me. This one here is all space books. The last couple of shelves down there are all technical documents and old NASA publications and stuff that I've had printed out because I can't deep read off a screen. This is all space stuff, down to like the toys up top are all space toys. This is only like half space toys and half space magazines. The rest are like my bit of fiction collection, but hands down, more books than anything. I've got another shelf. You can kind of see the behind the decapitated Saturn V rocket over there. Is another. I know. It's so broken. I should just get a new one. Is another bookshelf is half space adjacent, and it's stuff like Johnson's LBJ's autobiography and stuff that is like somehow tied to me doing better space things. A lot of it. There's a lot. I told you this before, but I feel like I should mention it again, that my parents always told me that books are okay to buy because you can always go back to them. So I have way too many books.
Yeah. Well, I'm not complaining. You can't see mine. And they're back there. And yes, I think that's required for me and Jeff if we're doing Read Science. I think books would rank high on possession. Are you like me too? Because I also have piles on my desk and on my bedside table and on floors everywhere. You can't see here. You don't see what's there. What's in my? Forget it. The stacks are too big. But I love them. I can't get rid of them. And
nope.
So
I know. It's like, yeah. Go ahead.
My next question about books is: are you going to write another one?
Yes. Yeah. I just don't know what it is yet. I'm working on it. I'm still trying to nail it down. I have sort of I kind of know what I want it to be about, but I'm still trying to figure out the core narrative of it.
Right.
So I can start pitching it and working on it, which is harder than you'd think because again, there's so much done about space. Right, the Apollo era is so written about and so covered. Well, how do you find something that's new that hasn't been done that needs a new book? So that's what I'm doing right now, is sort of that, like, here are all the big ideas that I want to deal with that are a little bit too esoteric, a little bit too niche. Where is that one thread that will carry it from super weirdo niche history that lives on my blog and YouTube channel into popular book?
Right.
It's annoying. It's tough. It's tough. It's getting there, but it's tough.
And what was the hardest thing about writing your first book?
Letting go.
Really?
Letting go of it.
I can't have everything.
Actually saying, I can't have everything. It was, I mean, this is one of my things that always bugs me as a reader is when an author puts in every single little detail as a way of almost, to me it's like showing you, look at all this research I did because every detail is in here. And I can appreciate the research, of course, but if it breaks up your narrative, it bothers me as a reader because I ultimately want to write books that flow, that just let you enjoy a story. So part of it, the letting go of details that I thought were really great, letting go of people that I thought were really interesting, but ultimately just didn't need to be there because they didn't advance the narrative. That was annoying because I wanted to get everything in there, but I also wanted to keep it readable enough for a general audience. And then also just, I mean, frankly, at the end of the whole writing process, just saying, I have to give this to my publisher now. Like, I can't keep reworking it. I mean, and like the worst thing is that, like, I mean, if you've ever, anybody who's ever written anything, you always want to fix it. Nothing's ever perfect for you, right? So I did a reading in at an event a few months ago, and I was just reading a passage, and I was just looking at it thinking, like, oh, I would like to rework that sentence. It's just letting go and just saying, like, okay, and it's enough. It's there. It's enough. And just trusting my external readers and my editors to catch things and say, like, this bit doesn't work. This is just not, this doesn't need to be there. This is just trusting it to other people was probably the hardest part.
Letting go is tough, but you did a good job of it.
Yeah. Oh, no, I look forward to your next book. And take your time. You don't have to have it out tomorrow.
I'm hoping for soon. I will say I absolutely loved writing it because it's just so fun to dive into a big project and just get lost in it, and I really want to get back to that. So
who are some writers Who are some writers you admire in this field? And you can go outside the field too, but I just wondered, like, you know, you have a video, 5 books you should read to get started on this, but is one or two authors in particular people who stand out to you?
In the space realm, the books that stand out to me are usually the historical accounts and the memoirs. So it's not really that an author stands out to me so much as a story stands out to me. There are people, again, coming back to Apollo 13, is Jim Lovell, the commander of the mission, co-wrote his autobiography with Jeffrey Kluger, who is an amazing author, an amazing writer, and he does a great job at sort of keeping it doesn't sound like it still sounds like it's in Lovell's own voice, but he shapes the story so well that it's really fascinating. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that for space. One of my favorite writers, just kind of in more history, nonfiction generally, is John Krakauer. Is just hands down one of those people that I read and I'm just like, I don't understand how you make this so good.
Right.
And there's a few others I can't. Yeah, they're just really good writers. There's a few others whose names escape me off the top of my head, and I could duck over to my shelf and figure it out. But yeah, it's more that like I'll pick up a book for a topic or for a story that sounds like something that I'd like to know about. But I don't necessarily follow authors per se.
Right, right. So I know we're closing in at the top of the hour. You have...
I just talked a lot.
Oh, well, we're glad. We're always
That's
happy.
the idea.
Yeah, exactly. This is...
It does not seem like an hour.
So we, I'm curious, I think you've been alluding to the fact you're going to start a podcast. Did this start and I've missed it?
Yeah.
Or?
No, it's my shipment from B&H should be here today with my new recorder, my new microphone, and all of the accessories to do that. It's really just, this summer has been insane. I've been traveling every week, and I was in Australia for 3 weeks, and then got hit with jet lag and just exhaustion after touring Australia. I was in a new city every 3 days. So that's coming, and I'm still trying to figure out, it's going to be a little bit wonky to start, just because I need to nail down what the format's going to be, the frequency, figure that out, but I'm going to start playing with it publicly. I'm going to just start recording things and put something out there and see what people like, don't like, and eventually kind of nail down on a format. So that's happening soon. That's coming today. I'm actually really excited to start unboxing my new nerd toys and might just play with it a bit this weekend or next week. So actually I have a meeting today about hosting, because that's the one part of this that I don't know, is how to host, like where it lives on the internet, not like
exactly,
hello.
exactly.
Yeah. So I'm trying to nail down that technical side of things, but it's coming. It's coming.
That's fantastic. So actually, Jeff, unless you had something pressing, I was thinking we could ask.
I have one observation left that is done in a few seconds. I filed this under, you take expertise where you can find it, and so I like, this was early on in the book, you said the seat in the X-15 was designed as an exact duplicate of an International Harvester tractor seat.
Yep. This is so funny. So when I was in Canberra a couple weeks ago, I did a full day of interviews on ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Company, with a lot of them with Dr. Carl, who is sort of like Australia's Bill Nye, and he loved that story. Every time I did like 5 interviews and a podcast and a TV spot, and every time he asked me about that story. And the story is that when you're in, I don't have my model next to me, but when you're in the X-15, you don't have a door, you can't like climb down. So it was so I should start with, it was air launched. I am the B-52. It was air launched from underneath the wing / cockpit of a B-52 bomber. But because it was under the wing and not in the belly, the pilot couldn't ride up in the main aircraft like he did in the B-29 that launched the X-1, and then Yeager climbed down, shut the door, and launched. He had to be loaded into the plane that was then loaded onto the launch plane that was then slowly went up to launch altitude, then launched, then flew his mission, which meant he was sitting in this seat without the ability to stretch really or move for a really long time, and the vibrations of that on the spine were kind of a question. So the NAC and the Air Force are kind of like, okay, well, how do we do this? And then ultimately the solution was, well, who deals with spine vibrations all day long and doesn't have back problems? Farmers, because they're driving tractors on bumpy fields all day, and they just have seats that are lightweight that just go with it, and they don't have, so they just looked at a tractor seat and they basically replicated it for the X-15 because it worked. And it's such a great, like, and this is what I mean about the 50s having this awesome, like, grassroots science thing, is it's like they didn't over-engineer it because they didn't have the means to over-engineer it. They had to just, like, figure it out, and they just went to what works, and they didn't reinvent the wheel. They took what worked and just added rockets. That's such a funny story. I do love that one.
It is. It is. It was sort of the bit of salt that made the cake taste good.
Yeah.
So, since we're near the end, I do want to ask if you had anything you wanted to share with the viewers before we sign off.
Oh, like plugging all of my stuff?
Sure.
Sure.
Plug away.
Well, the big one, since we're talking about reading science, is my book, Breaking the Chains of Gravity, which is in stores and online and all of those fun things.
Everywhere, and it's good. Read it.
All right, I can join.
Thank you. Awesome, trifecta. Yeah, no, the other big thing, so my blog is, my blog and my YouTube channel are both called Vintage Space. The blog is at Popular Science, and that will be, now that so we're geo-blocked in Australia, so I haven't blogged in a month because Australia, but I will be back to blogging this week. And the YouTube channel, weekly videos about something in space history. It runs the gamut from human stories to me meeting astronauts to technical stuff to anything, and I encourage questions. I don't always get into the discussion in the comments because sometimes it gets crazy, and sometimes I just don't have time, but I do sift through them, and I do read what your questions are for ideas, so those are the two best places to come and learn more about weird space things from me. Yeah.
Great. Wow. What a great conversation today. Amy, I am so glad you joined us. Of course, I knew you'd be a great guest. It just took us a while to get to our books. And
no, it's all good. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun, and I've been wanting to do this show with you for a while. So this is great.
Thank you.
I love it. I do just hang out and be nerdy with people that you actually know in real life.
Yes, I know, and it is nice. It's always a pleasure for me to go, oh yeah, I've met this person. Good. They'll say yes. Yeah. No problem.
Yeah.
There you go. It's always the people you have to approach and go, I'm so-and-so. You don't know me, but could you come on my show?
Yeah, that hard sell.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. So, okay, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Glad Amy could be here and talk about her book, Breaking the Chains of Gravity, which we've already promoted many, many times, but continue.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for a great book.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
All right. See you guys later.